Welcome back to 28storms.com. I am Jason Moreland, and I'm here to give you your latest weather update for the midnight hour of January 25th, 2011. There's a lot going on this morning, so let's get right on into it. And as we'll see first, here's your latest water vapor imagery, and you'll first note that there's a sharp positively tilted trough diving into the state of Texas this morning. As a result, we're seeing widespread rainfall beginning to break out across much of the lower Mississippi Valley. The surface low is beginning to form between Lake Charles and Galveston, Texas, but as you can see, convection and rainfall activity is developing well out ahead of the low pressure center. This is the latest Mesoanalysis from the Storm Prediction Center website, and this is just another representation of what's going on. And here's your 1012 millibar surface low beginning to develop south of Lake Charles. Now here is your look at your latest surface dew points, and as you note across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, dew points really aren't all that high, but if you look further off the coastline, you notice that dew points are in the mid-60s, and these mid-60 dew points are expected to spread into the Florida Peninsula later this afternoon, and that will set the stage for the possibility of at least some severe weather action. In fact, the Storm Prediction Center has issued a Day 1 convective slight risk for much of the Florida Peninsula. There are also 5% tornado probabilities for much of Florida, meaning that there's about a 5% chance of a tornado within 25 miles of any particular point. There's also some risk for damaging wind gusts, and it's outlined as 15% across much of Florida. And the only threat that really doesn't exist is the potential for significant hail. That really is not going to be an issue tomorrow or later today. Now taking a quick look at the 0Z GFS, we'll start at the 0 hour and work our way forward into time. Okay, we'll see that our surface low developing across the Louisiana coastline, spreading eastward throughout the day with 1 to 2 inches of rainfall breaking out across much of the Gulf Coast states. And then later this afternoon into Tuesday evening, we have a potential squall line developing and heading toward the Florida Peninsula. Now, any potential for supercellular activity will be more likely ahead of this squall line, but there will also be the potential for isolated supercells embedded within the squall. So there will be some threat of tornadoes throughout the afternoon and evening hours, so residents in that area should continue to watch the weather throughout much of the day. Taking a quick look at some severe weather parameters, we'll first take a look at the lifted indices, and generally you want values at least greater than -2, or should I say lower than -2 degrees Celsius. And starting off at around 10 a.m. this morning, those values would not be sufficient for severe weather development over the Florida Peninsula. But as we work our way into the afternoon hours, you will begin to find that the lifted index values begin to increase as that surface low begins to really get cranking across the Florida Peninsula. You'll also notice that the low has now deepened to about 1008 millibars up to this point, and this is by around 3 p.m. Later today. Okay, so your lifted index values do look favorable for much of the Florida Peninsula. Convective available potential energy, or CAPE, doesn't look to be all that bad for severe weather either. As we start in the late morning hours of later this morning, CAPE really isn't that high, although it begins to really ramp up by around 12 o'clock noon or 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and we see values between 500 and 1,000 joules per kilogram, and that'll increase steadily as we work our way between 12 p.m. and 3 p.m. Okay, so lifted index values and CAPE values are favorable. Surface dew points are more than well established across much of the Florida Peninsula. We have values ranging between 60 and 70 pretty much over the entire region, and this obviously extends well into 850 millibars, so there will be no mixing of dry air. In fact, the only problem is that there is too little dry air, and we usually would like a dry punch around 700 millibars, and that's really not the case. In fact, if we take a look at a forecast sounding, and again, much of these images are from twisterdata.com, so thanks to them for providing a very good forecast model website. Now, if you look at the sounding, you'll notice that the column is very saturated. Okay, so there's very little dry punch. You usually want at least a dry punch around 650 to 700 millibars. So that's really not the case. On the other bright side, though, if you're a severe weather enthusiast, the shear values are looking pretty good, with surface to 500 millibar bulk shear values between 40 and 50 knots for much of the Florida Peninsula throughout the afternoon. In short, I wouldn't rule out an isolated one or two tornadoes across the peninsula, but some damaging winds will more than likely be your primary threat, along with heavy rainfall. But keep an eye on the weather just in case. And one more thing I would like to elaborate on before we start to sum up this video is the potential for some wintry precipitation across northern Alabama, northern Mississippi, and much of Tennessee. So as all of this heavy rainfall and the tornado threat begins to diminish, we'll still have a lot of cold air in place, and the GFS is showing 10-meter temperatures below freezing, as we still have some lingering moisture across Tennessee and those following areas. Now, the big question mark is, will there be enough cold air near the surface for much of this precipitation to fall as snow? Well, at around 850 millibars, the temperatures are more than cold enough because we have a strong upper level low that's coming into play. As you can see, this is Wednesday morning. There will be a strong upper level feature moving across much of the deep south states. Now, even though a lot of the models do not show surface temperatures being cold enough for snowfall accumulation, if they're not handling the dynamics, the upper level dynamics of this system, they may be overdoing the surface temperatures at least a couple degrees. Now, here's a forecast sounding for northeast Mississippi early Wednesday morning. And if you look really closely, near the surface, temperatures are almost above freezing, and they're flirting right around with the 0 degrees Celsius line. So it really wouldn't take much to get snow if this sounding were to verify. And again, these models may be 1 or 2 degrees too warm. So bottom line is, as this lingering precipitation begins to continue moving eastward, I would not rule out 1 to 3 inches of snow across much of that area, and 3 to 4 is possible in some isolated areas, especially in elevated mountainous regions of Tennessee. After that storm begins to clear out, we're going to be entering a quiet period for a couple days, where conditions really won't be very bad at all. In fact, we're going to see a gradual warm up with little in the way of any rainfall whatsoever. And this is now through 120 hours, and we finally begin to see another low pressure system begin to develop around the Texas Panhandle around Amarillo, and this is about a week in advance. But in around another 6 to 7 days, that might be our next best chance for some rainfall or precipitation, and we'll just start to follow that as we get closer to that period. So we will continue to monitor the threat for severe weather across Florida later today, along with the potential for snowfall in the Dixie states once again this winter. We'll be monitoring that potential over the next 24 to 48 hours. So once again, thank you for stopping by at 28storms.com, and come back and check us out again soon.